For the film Oppenheimer, Kodak developed a special black and white IMAX film for Christopher Nolan in order to capture the most authentic large film stock footage to display the birth of the atomic age. This Kodak film is actually a reference to the real history of the creation of the first atomic weapon, when Kodak sued the United States military for contaminating their film with radioactive fallout. Kodak actually discovered secret nuclear weapons testing in the process, forcing them to sign a non-disclosure agreement after the court case, promising to keep it quiet. During the 1940s, when the military was testing their weapons in New Mexico, Kodak noticed that a significant amount of their X-ray film stock would appear to be riddled with black dots after testing. Radioactive waste from these tests was floating all the way across the United States from New Mexico to the northeastern region where the fallout made contact with Kodak's film stock. The invisible light emitted from the radioactive isotopes was interpreted on the film as a black smudge or dot, making the X-ray unreliable. X-ray film is a little bit more sensitive than normal film, but pretending that this is normal film, if you were to print a photograph of a black dot on a negative, it would appear as a white dot on the print. The Van Allen belt surrounds the Earth like a ring. It protects us by collecting radiation outside of the Earth's atmosphere. A space shuttle once climbed to an orbit that put them right around 200 kilometers away from the Van Allen belt. And even though they did not enter the Van Allen belt, the astronauts complained of disorientation, claiming that light kept flashing through their eyes even when they had their eyes closed shut. This was because radioactive particles were whizzing through their heads, and the sensors inside of their eyes were reading it as light. This is how we know that the Apollo mission photos taken from the surface of the moon during the landing were fake, because there's almost certainly no way the astronauts managed to get their sensitive Hasselblad film to the moon without it being absolutely shredded by the Van Allen belt. NASA didn't know about the Van Allen belt during the Apollo missions, so they wouldn't have known that the Hasselblad prints would just be a white blobby mess. NASA staged the entire event as a global psyop during the Cold War. But that's old news. We all know that already. You're here to learn something new. Why the hell did the United States military conduct countless cattle mutilations in the United States and Canada between the 1960s and 80s? There were multiple possible locations proposed for the testing of the first nuclear weapons. Islands off of the east coast of Florida, for example, were considered as the best location for the safety of the environment as well as the citizens of the United States and North America, as the fallout would float into the ocean. Nevada and New Mexico were considered the worst possible locations, as all of the nuclear fallout would likely spread across large regions of the continent of North America, but the trade-off would be that it is the most remote region of the United States, making it the most secure location for top-secret activities. So obviously the military chose Nevada and New Mexico as their test sites, and said, good luck, the rest of you. Out of all the UFO stories that I've covered over the years, none felt more raw or real than the cattle mutilations of Western United States and Canada. I buried the details of those events under a story about deep underground military bases and aliens because I was a little nervous about the consequences of revealing the answer to this riddle. That was the old me. Now I don't give a fuck. Give the CIA my address. That's a little inside joke between me and the CIA. You gotta be in the CIA to get that joke. Aliens were always the media's go-to answer with everything during the Cold War era. They would really only offer you the two options for anything supernatural or bizarre that would happen in the sky: the tin-foil hat answer, or the official military explanation that would come later. You see a light in the sky? Ah, that's swamp gas. Or is it aliens? You see a Mothman flying around a military base? That's just a sandhill crane. Or is it aliens? A broken arrow nuclear warhead lands in the forest outside of Rendlesham?
At that point, we saw people, or whatever you want to call them, coming out. They didn't come out. There were no doors or anything on this ship. These things moved out.
You better believe that was aliens. My entire Tell Me More series was set up for this video. The way that the United States military acted so scared about their secret activities in the areas around New Mexico and Nevada, they tried to destroy the reputations of anyone who got close to the cattle mutilation issue. The United States Air Force psychologically tortured a man in the process, who then later died while locked up in psychiatric hospital. I laid out the details for all of this in the Dulce Base video. The Air Force does not give a fuck. So we all know the story. Hundreds of cattle in Nevada, New Mexico, Colorado, and many other states, including Canadian provinces, were found mysteriously killed and mutilated on ranches and farms between the 1960s and 1980s. This involved other types of livestock as well, like horses and sheep, but the assailants would always take the exact same set of organs from the sacrificed animals and leave them fully exsanguinated. There was never even a single drop of blood found on the ground near the body. These extractions apparently were usually very quick, as several reports claimed that the rancher was with their herd only a few minutes before the incident occurred, then left the field and returned to find that several cattle were dead. There were no bullet holes, there were never any animal teeth marks. For example, the assailants would extract things like ears, udders, and sometimes this would all happen in as little as 15 minutes. And almost every single reported case had the exact same elements. They would happen at night when things were quiet and the ranchers weren't paying attention to their herd. They would happen nearly silently, other than the occasional report of a brief cry of pain from a cow. And the extractions were not random mutilations, but surgically precise incisions that seemed to be perfectly cauterized, as if cut by a futuristic laser scalpel, which was supposed to be new technology in the 1970s. And the only thing that the ranchers themselves reported seeing was the occasional silent floating craft or flashing lights. A couple of people came forward later describing a flying saucer object hovering over a hillside, beaming a light towards the ground like you would see in a movie. And two people came forward claiming to have had encounters with beings operating the craft, claiming that they were alien-like creatures who were doing what must be done. Seeing how none of the people who claimed to have encountered aliens were actually ranchers who owned cattle, those are the accounts that I feel the least able to believe. They used hypnotic regression therapy to suss out the details of their supposed abduction accounts, which just sounded like some theater bullshit to me. This problem never really stopped though. A handful of cattle and horses have been found mutilated the same way every decade. Like there was a case in Colorado in 2009 where a rancher found 4 cows, including juvenile calves, who had their udders surgically removed. And another beef cow found dead in Oregon in 2019. To this day, the assailants are still taking the exact same set of organs and tissues from the cattle, and they're leaving them fully exsanguinated without even a single drop of blood on the ground. The way that these cattle mutilations were reported by the media made it seem reasonable to assume that the assailants were extraterrestrial, as almost every aspect of the story required an explanation that went beyond the possibilities of available technology at the time. A normal person would have been totally swayed by this, like it was a magic trick. Ufology pathologist Linda Moulton Howe produced a documentary, A Strange Harvest, describing the events and laying out the details of the cattle extractions as they occurred in the 1970s, with a heavy focus on how it would be impossible for humans to perform these extractions today with the available technology at the time. Characters like Linda Moulton Howe and Richard Doty are used to sell stories like this, to make the magic seem more believable. Like the way that the incisions were perfectly cauterized, she showed how modern laser scalpels couldn't match the abilities described by eyewitness accounts, as the type of laser used in hospitals was much too weak to remove an entire organ in just a few minutes or a few seconds. And she demonstrated how loud a helicopter would be if someone were to have seen one hovering over the desert of Nevada or New Mexico, explaining that the military doesn't possess anything fast or silent enough to explain what the ranchers were describing. When I produced the Dulce Bay's video discussing the cattle mutilations, I reached out to Linda Moulton Howe in hopes that she would give me comments to enlighten me on the events, and the only reply that she gave to me was, just tell them to make sure to check out her show, 6:30 on Wednesday on Earth Files YouTube channel. Well, here's a little secret, boys and girls. In the media world, when you ask someone for a comment and they reply, just tell them to watch my show, that's secret code speak for, go fuck yourself. So in response to that, I would like to say, you are a goddamned fucking liar, Linda Moulton Howe. As I described before, it was already proven by the late New Mexico State Trooper Gabe Valdez that there were humans involved in the cattle extractions. The leading New Mexico police officer involved in the investigation discovered physical human implements that were left behind at more than just a couple of the cattle ranches that were affected by the mutilations. Implements such as gas masks and aluminum radar chaff. Those are not alien implements. Not only that, but Officer Gabe Valdez also managed to link certain cattle mutilation activities to a specific deep underground military base in the Sierra Nevada, and by no coincidence at all, I assure you, when that base was shut down later on, all of the cattle mutilation activity stopped in the area for nearly a decade. Therefore, we know it was human beings performing the extractions. So if we already know the answer to whom was behind the surgical extractions of the cattle across Canada and the United States in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, why has nobody bothered pushing to find out why the military was doing this in the first place? Being an officer of the law, Gabe Valdez was sworn to secrecy, but we are not. We are the people. Linda was also featured in that same UFO documentary that I referenced about Richard Doty, in which very few clips were used, but she seemed very closed off to the idea that the military could be perpetrating any of these UFO-related activities, as if she would refuse to even entertain the idea. They tried to play it off like Linda's reputation was being dragged through the mud. She's like, oh, her credibility as a reporter because she's a woman is being brought into question. Except everything she said was almost perfectly consistent with what the military was willing to reveal. In fact, her narrative is that the military is actively covering up alien activities. And I watched her channel a bit, and almost every live stream, the conclusion is just that all we should do is just sit here and love each other and love the universe, and eventually the aliens will come and save us. So she's another one of those Church of Apathy people like PragerU. When I started looking into this mystery a couple of years back, I couldn't help but focus on the pattern of extractions, how they always took the exact same collection of organs and always fully exsanguinated the blood, prompting rumors that the aliens were vampiric. Linda Moulton Howe herself insisted that the aliens needed these ingredients to create some sort of a biosoup to sustain their own lives, implying that they absorbed the biosoup through their skin. And nobody has challenged that narrative since the 1980s. But none of that really made any amount of sense to me, as they would take everything but the meat they always left behind the fucking meat. In fact, some of these bodies were found so early after their surgeries, and they were surgeries, their meat was still perfectly edible. That's how clean and efficient the mutilations were. So I started thinking to myself here, because the military obviously isn't extracting these ingredients to help grow or sustain anything, as the military or even the theoretical aliens, whether or not they exist, could just buy cows themselves if they really needed cattle to feed someone, or intervene in the normal slaughtering or butchering process somewhere in the meat industry itself, injecting their own agents into butcher shops or some crap. It's crazy to think they're just stealing random cows because they need to eat cows. That's what I'm saying. So instead of extracting something good from these cows, maybe they're extracting something bad from these cows. Something that they don't want us to know is in the cows that might be harming us. I'm just gonna steal a couple of examples from the Veritasium video, but there are lots of different isotopes that land and settle in lots of different parts of the body, such as strontium-90, which has a half-life of 30 years, by the way. Strontium-90 settles in our bones and our teeth, leading to bone cancer and even leukemia, as well as other degenerative issues. Then there's radioactive iodine-131, which ends up in cow's milk and then lands in our thyroid, which is especially problematic for children. So now that we know some of the types of radioactive isotopes that can hypothetically settle in the tongue, the ear, the blood, the udders of a cow, can any of those radioactive isotopes end up floating in the air as waste after a nuclear weapons test in New Mexico or Nevada, and then land in the soil, the water, and the grass in the ranches across the United States and Canada, and then be ingested by a cow, which then gets ingested by us? Yes. Just because we cannot understand how the military is doing something does not mean that the military is not the one doing it. The media and the military work together to shape our perception of events like this. That is how the Matrix operates. Just like JFK said, the entire media and the military-industrial complex rule the world through secret means for secret powers. That shit is real. The moon landing footage was faked, just like today's UFO threat is fake. The Cold War era is back, folks. So in conclusion, why the hell did the military mutilate hundreds, if not thousands, of cattle over a 30-year period? Because of Robert Oppenheimer. Because if the United States military told the beef ranchers that they were responsible for destroying their livestock and their livelihood, the military would be legally liable for the damages. Just ask Kodak.